Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Coffee with John, morning caffeine for your business. Part two with Matt Franklin. Matt, great to see you again. Thanks for calling in from California. I know it's a bit
Thanks
early
for having me.
I appreciate it. And your podcast, Rogue Retirement Lounge, it's a great podcast. Yesterday in our part one, we talked about don't pay down your mortgage. I'm not going to ask you what coffee you're drinking because I know yesterday you said you were going to go back to bed. So
Yep.
So there we go. So let's continue this discussion on retirement, right? So I think a lot of people post COVID are thinking, and I know, and I'm thinking differently post COVID. You know, I think a lot of people thought, hey, I'll retire and live. I'll retire when I'm 65, 70 years old. I'll buy a place when I'm a second home in Florida when I'm 70. But I think a lot of us saw people get sick and die early, and not just from COVID, but I think it just really kind of changed our view on our own mortality. And that we want to maybe start doing things when we're healthy, not when we're just getting older. And so how do we prep for retirement to live longer while still enjoying earlier?
Well, one thing that I tell people is to try the concept of a pre-retirement, meaning that if you're waiting to that date that you've got your number, say you need to have a cash flow of, just to keep numbers around, you need to have $100,000 a year in order to retire, and you're not going to do it until you reach that number. Well, you might end up working really hard those last few years, and you might end up losing out on some of those enjoyable years like you're talking about while you're still young. Live big while you're still young.
Right.
But if you were to do a pre-retirement where, say, you ratcheted yourself down to part-time and only worked, a couple of days a week, but made enough supplementary income so that you could still get by, it will do two things. One, it's going to give you that opportunity to still, do fun things while you're young. But the other thing is that it's going to enable you to kind of get mentally ready to retire. One thing they don't tell you about retirement is that it's a big switch, and you lose the purpose, you lose the social aspects of having a job. There's so much that you're not necessarily prepared for, that when you just quit your job, it can be a real serious shock to the system.
Right.
And doing a pre-retirement, which is currently what I'm doing, gets you ready for it. You're going to find out, are you going to start drinking earlier in the day? Or are you going to golf 7 days a week?
Right.
It kind of gives you this chance to see what it's like to not have 100% of your time filled with your work.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense to kind of ease into it and find out what activities. I think a lot of us think, if I had the time, I would golf 7 days a week. I'd play tennis 7 days a week. I'd do this. But then once you have the 7 days a week, sometimes you don't necessarily want to do it.
Exactly. Yeah. And you might end up, developing some bad habits. And having that little kind of, maybe that part-time thing for these last few, this pre-retirement, these taper years, it gives you that reason to get up out of bed and keep a little bit of structure, because the complete absence of structure is one of the things that we're seeing in the COVID era. It's driving people insane. Like, literally, the suicides are up. Mental health problems have gone way sky high during the COVID era. And so it's shown me that we in general are not prepared to have this kind of no structure, like stuck at home world. And that is kind of a little bit like what retirement could be like if you don't have a plan for it. Yeah.
I just interviewed a guy by the name of Scott Silverman, and he wrote a book called The Opioid Epidemic, and it just came out on on May 31st. And I'm having him on a 5-part series the week of June 14th on Coffee with John, talking about this epidemic. He was just on the show last week as well. But you're right. I mean, we need to be conscious. Well, Matt, this has been great. I mean, two great tips. I mean, Matt Franklin, host of the Rogue Retirement Podcast. Tip number 1, don't pay down your mortgage. Tip number 2, a pre-retirement. And I think those are great tips. Where can people connect with you, get a hold of you, and learn more about you?
Well, the main way is just the any podcast platform where you listen to podcasts. You can find my podcast called the Rogue Retirement Lounge, and that's the best way to find me.
I love it. I love it. Well, I appreciate you waking up early for me. I'm a big fan of your work and what you do. Appreciate you being on yesterday and today in this 2-part series. Think Community. I've also interviewed Matt on my podcast, so you can check him out on all the platforms and on my website. Hey, Matt, thanks a ton. Thanks for being on the show. Think Community, if you're thinking about retiring in 5, 10, 15 years, this is a great podcast for you to tune into. And you can never start thinking about this soon enough, I think.
That's right.
This is a very important topic. So Think Community, thank you. Matt, always good to see you. Have a good rest of the morning. And
Thanks, John.
a great day. And you and I will connect soon. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks, John.
Thank you.